Good. Very good. We'll continue. So today, what I'm going to talk about is loss. I'm going to talk about loss today. Okay? What I mean by loss is several different things. Of course, the obvious form of loss is when there's a person in your life who is a part of your life who's now not a part of your life anymore. That kind of loss, which is painful and difficult and it hurts. But there's also the kind of loss that is its own kind of pain, which is when you haven't lost the person yet, but you're afraid that you're going to. That the person does something or doesn't do something that causes fear, I'm going to lose this person. Or if something doesn't change, then we're not going to still be together. You normally know when you're in a relationship with somebody if you feel that kind of tightness, that kind of I can't live, I can't survive, I can't do well without this person, based on the amount of anger that you have when the person doesn't do what you want, or based on the amount of fear that you have that the person who's not doing what you want isn't going to start doing what you want. And when you have those intense feelings around somebody else not conforming to the way you feel that you need them to be, then there's a need there that is an anticipation of a loss that's coming, or maybe that it's already come. That in a sense you're already missing part of yourself as this person is not doing what you need them to do because you need them in an especially deep way. Sometimes the sort of loss that we experience is the loss of a dream, the loss of a hope of what's going to come from somebody else. In fact, it might be something where you have hopes that you might be in a close relationship with somebody, but your desire for a relationship with somebody, or a depth or quality of relationship with somebody, is not as great as their willingness to engage with you. And so as time goes on and you try and you find, no, this really isn't going anywhere, this really isn't happening, then there's a sort of sense of loss, not that you actually have lost anything that you had with the person, but you lost the hope that you might have with that person. Now, loss is painful no matter how you look at it, but there's a lot of ways in which we can compound the pain of loss by our need, especially when our needs go beyond what's appropriate, when we expect something of somebody else that we really ought to be expecting of God. There are idols that can be built in the hidden places of the human heart, where we identify ourselves so fully and so strongly with somebody else that we feel like we're losing ourselves if we lose that person. Sometimes, maybe most of the time, it happens within families. That a close family relationship, that if you lose somebody, it's especially painful, and it's going to be painful no matter what. But even somebody that you haven't lost yet, you're in relationship with that person, and the fact that they're not conforming to what you need, the fact that they're not that they're not making the progress or improvement that you hope that they would make, they're not cleaning up the thing that you need them to clean up, is causing intense distress. There are some times that the need itself becomes the need. We can get into such a habit and such a rhythm of needing something from somebody else, needing somebody to accommodate us, needing somebody to meet our needs, that the not having and that need itself becomes the thing that we sort of rely on, a strange sort of oddly familiar, oddly comforting pain. We can get to a point where we identify ourselves or we form the habit of needing somebody else such that becomes what it is that we're all about. Now, that's never something that somebody wants to have happen on purpose. It's never something that somebody wants to experience. But nevertheless, it can happen, and we can experience it, where what we're built around and what our mind is built around is, if only this person was back in my life, or if only this person wasn't gone, or if only he did this, or if only she didn't do that, or if only the person wouldn't drift away, or if only this person would give to me what I'm giving to that person. And when that happens in ourself, that we create that sort of self around that need, It takes the actual pain of loss, which is very real, and it compounds it with suffering that we actually contribute to. We contribute to it by having the dependence on someone for self that God alone can supply. That's a problem for us. That's a problem for our own experience of self, but it's also a problem because when we do that, we diverge from God's will and what God wants. And there are lessons that we can take from this as to how to deal with loss from Abraham, who was a man just like us, who lost just like we lose. And we're going to look at Abram here because that was what his name was at the time in Genesis chapter 13. Now, in Genesis chapter 13, we've already seen Abram here for a couple of weeks, this man who's the father of faith. And we saw 2 weeks ago that Abram was a guy who God appeared to and called him out of where he was. And he told him to leave his family behind. If you look at Genesis chapter 12, Genesis is the first book of the Bible. I hope you'll turn there with me. If you look at Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, the Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." So he was told to leave his people, leave his father's household. And we've already seen how he left his land, but he didn't leave his father's house. In fact, his father literally came along with him. And the way it is described there in chapter 11, just before, is that Terah, Abram's father, was the one who was really relocating the whole family, and they were all migrating to where they were going, not all the way to where Abram was told to go, but halfway there to this place called Haran. And Abram stayed there until his father Terah died. Once Terah died, then God told Abram again, it's time to go. Go again. Go away from your father's household to the land I'm going to show you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make you great. But you have to go where I'm telling you to go in order to go there. And we see in Genesis 12:4, so Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. So he left almost everybody from his father's household behind, except for his nephew, the son of his brother Haran, who had died. And Lot goes with Abram. And Lot goes with Abram to the land of Canaan. And then he goes from the land of Canaan when Abram takes some time, he migrates to Egypt because there's famine in Canaan. We looked at that last week. Abram, who is a man who's full of faith and took this bold step, and yet then after he had all this faith and took this bold step, got afraid and kind of wimped out and went to Egypt and ran into problems there. We looked at that last time. Lot went with him down to Egypt. And then Lot went with him back to Canaan when Abram was expelled from Egypt for lying to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And he returned back to Canaan. And Lot was with him there. So why did Abram take Lot? Why was his nephew so important that Abram was going to take him to these different places? Lot was a grown man. We're going to see that here in chapter 13. But Lot was a grown man. And he was a wealthy man. He was a man like Abram who had many possessions. But Abram took Lot with him, even though God said, leave your father's household. Why? Well, it could be that when his brother Haran was dying, maybe Haran said to Abram as sort of a dying wish, take care of my son Lot. Watch out for him. Follow him, or have him follow you. Protect him. See that he's doing okay. Maybe that was the case. Maybe what it was is that Abram, who had been told by God, I'm going to make you into a great nation. There's going to be many people who come from you. Whole nations are going to come from you. You're going to be blessed. That Abram was thinking, wow, Lord, that's a great promise. And believed God. And yet at the same time thought that God might need some help. In fact, we definitely have evidence that Abram thinks this way with some later chapters in Genesis that we're going to get to this summer. Yes, God, I believe you, but I see that you could use some of my help. And sometimes Abram doesn't always make good decisions that way. In fact, we saw that last week. Yes, God, I know you're going to make me into a great nation, but I can tell that you need some help feeding me. So I'm going to go to Egypt. And I know that you're going to bless those who bless me and curse those who curse me. But I can tell you need some help. So I'm going to tell a lie to the Egyptians so that they don't kill me and take my wife as their wife. So Abram has a tendency to do this, and maybe he was thinking, God, yes, I know you're going to make me into a great nation, but I can tell you need some help. So Lot, my nephew, maybe he's going to be my adopted son. And he's going to inherit from me as well as to inherit from his own father, Haran. And he's going to be the person for both of us, that the great nation is going to come through him, because Abram had no child. His wife Sarai was childless. Maybe that's what Abram was thinking. Maybe that's why Abram, as we saw last week, was willing to take the risk of letting Sarai be taken as a wife to somebody else, as a wife to Pharaoh, even though she was actually his wife, to lie, to say that, she's my sister, we're not attached, we're not married, and so that she went into Pharaoh's household as his wife. Maybe Abram thought, things will still work out for me if that happens, because I have Lot here. Lot is going to be my descendant. Lot's going to be my chosen heir, my adopted son. Maybe that's why Abram made that decision. I don't know. But whatever it was, there was something about Lot that Abram felt, I need him. I need him here. I need to have him along. And so that's when we get to chapter 13, and Abram takes a loss. Genesis 13, beginning at verse 1. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev. That's the southern territory of Canaan, where with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. He had made a mistake. He had screwed up in Egypt. Now he was coming back to the Lord.
Is a demonstration
now Lot,
Wirecast.
who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. I'm going to pause right there to describe what's going on up to this point, because this might seem kind of strange or foreign to us, but this is actually not very strange at all to somebody in an ancient culture like in ancient Israel. See, in Israel, the economic engine, like for generally all pre-industrial societies, is agriculture. It's about growing enough food that you can eat. And also you have the hides you use for leather, and you make stuff out of that, and so on and so forth. And so the main two things that was is, on the one hand, agriculture itself, so farming, planting stuff and it grows, you eat it. And then the other side being herding, right? To have flocks and herds, to have herds of cattle, to have flocks of sheep. And so these were the two things that everybody did. Now, Abram and Lot, these guys are nomads. So that means they're not planting anything, or at least if they do plant, they're not planting a lot. Maybe a garden if they're just in some place for maybe a year or just long enough for a growing season. But by and large, they're getting their foodstuffs, like their bread, their grain, and so forth, by trading with other farmers who are around. But they themselves, as nomads, as people without a home where they're planted in a particular property, that this is where we are moving around, their wealth and their sustenance was in their animals. Now, by being together, these guys were very, very wealthy. And God had blessed them enormously, which meant that they had really big herds and really big flocks. They had lots and lots of animals. But since they were living together in the same place, it means they had to share grazing land. They had to share, there needed to be enough space that their flocks and their herds could eat. And if there was too much animals for the grazing land, then they needed to separate and go further apart so there'd be enough vegetation for all these animals to eat. And the situation, if you're a farmer, is if you got a particular plot of land, you can make fences there. You can have boundary markers, you can make fences, and it can be very clear, this is my property, that's your property, and as long as we agree that these stones represent the boundary line, then we're good. There's really no need to dispute about whose is what. But if you're a herder, then that's a different story, because it means that you're never just in one place. You're always migrating around. But you would migrate around, to take your herd, your flock to different places. They would eat, munch somewhere, and then, okay, we're running out of grass here. We got to go on to the next place. And so you'd move it around. And so you'd have certain places that you'd go regularly, time after time after time. And if you go there regularly, you might start to think, this is my area. This is my territory because this is where I take my flocks and herds. But what about the other shepherds or the other ranchers? What about them as they take their flocks and herds around? What if you show up to your meadow where, you go every few months, and you show up there because you're going to pasture the flock, and there's nothing there? There's no vegetation there, and there's no vegetation there because somebody else with their flock of sheep was already there and ate it all up. Or what if you get to the same meadow at the same time that some other shepherd does? You're like, hey, there's only enough for one flock. I always come here. No, I always come here. No, I always come here. Okay, so fighting and quarreling between these different herdsmen was very common because they're laying claim to the same territory all the time. They've got to share it together, and there could be bickering and fighting. In fact, this is so common that apparently in societies that are heavily based around shepherding, fighting and quarreling is actually seen as a mark of like a rite of passage. I've read that, maybe not today, but traditionally in Greece, a boy would become a man. And I'm not talking Greece like ancient Greece either. I mean, that's true. But I mean, even in, the last couple hundred years, that a boy became a man by having a quarrel and a fight in public with somebody else from some other family just to prove that he could do it. Because you have to do it so much. There are even other tribes or other groups or other peoples in the world that the way a boy became a man, the rite of passage, is to steal a sheep from somebody else. You need to prove that you could actually sneak in under cover of darkness, steal it, and bring it back, okay? Because they'd be stealing from each other all the time, okay? The Scots are a people who are known for many things, and they're known for many good things. And one of the things they're known for that's maybe not so good is the stereotype is having a short temper, okay? I mean, aren't the Scots the one that have like one of their games, their pastimes is shin kicking? Has anybody ever seen that? Okay, Kelly's seen that. Okay, that this is actually something that's done, This is mine. No, it's mine. All right, well, let's go out and kick each other's shins until somebody wins, This is actually a sport that some people do. I think they get pretty, boozed up before they do it. But they do this. So anyway, shepherding cultures, right? And by the way, those people from Scotland with their own shepherding culture and getting into fights about that, when they came to this part of the world during colonial times, you know where they moved? Here. So if you run into anybody really feisty and the kind of get off my land kind of thing, well, now you know where it comes from, okay? I'm not making this up. This is the truth. Okay? So and I could go on further than that, but I'm not gonna go the digression I want to go on. But anyway, so this is a common problem. So the problem that Abram will not hear, this is a common problem. And so Abram realizes, this is my nephew. He's like my surrogate son, and I love him. But the reality is we're getting so wealthy and so blessed, we can't all be right next to each other. We can't be living in tents right next to each other. We've got to get some space between us to share the land. But Abram is very much thinking about sharing the land. See, God had told him, go to the land that I'll show you. And it's going to belong to you, and it's going to belong to your descendants after you.
This is a demonstration.
So I want to show you here what that meant for Abram. This right here is the land. This is good. You're seeing it just great. This is Canaan. This is just a portion of it. There's actually a little bit more to the south and a little bit more to the north, but this is pretty much it between the Mediterranean Sea on the west and the Jordan River on the east. This is the heart of the modern nation of Israel and Palestine. West Bank is this thing over here like this, okay? And this is Jordan, modern-day Jordan over here on the east side of the Jordan River. And so this is where Abram was. And we read in the text that Abram went back to this place where he had camped when he first got to the land between Bethel and Ai, which is right here, right in the middle of this picture here. And so this is where Abram and Lot are. Now, as you look at it from here, from this angle, you can't really see anything particularly special, But we're not going to look at it from this angle. See, this is the really cool thing I wanted to show you. I've had this toy for a long time, and I've used it only on occasion, but I've never actually used it in a service before that I can remember. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to look at this from Abram and Lot's perspective. So we're going to zoom in. We're going to zoom in real close, okay? And then we're going to look at it from Abram and Lot's point of view. Now, the elevation here is exaggerated. It's not quite as extreme as this, but I exaggerated it so that you could see. As you can see, looking this way,
this is a demonstration.
This part in the middle where the big word Canaan is, that's called the hill country. And there's a much higher elevation there. It's rugged terrain. And you can see the coastal plain here to the west along the Mediterranean Sea. And we read in the text, it said that the Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. That's an indicator that in this territory, but especially in the low-lying areas, the coastal plain along the Mediterranean Sea, and then also, going a little too fast there, along the Jordan River right here, these coastal areas, that's where the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living for the most part because the agriculture was good there. Low-lying terrain, thick soil, decent rainfall, that's where they were able to grow stuff. Because they were able to grow stuff there, because there were farmers' fields there, that was not where the flocks and the herds could be most of the time. They couldn't be there because there were fields there with crops in them, and the people there would say, no, you get out of here. Don't eat my crops. Get out. And so flocks and herdsmen, they would graze, they would pasture up here in the hill country, in the higher area, the higher terrain, okay, the higher elevations. And there would be some farming up there as well, but there would be more grazing land. The only time then they would go into the valleys would be like right after the crops had been harvested and before they could plant anything else, then there could be a little bit of grazing, but for the most part, they were in this upper area. Now, something else that you wouldn't naturally know about this, when Abram says to Lot, if I go left, if you want to go to the left, I'll go to the right. If I want to go to the right, you go to the left. Something that you're probably not aware of is how the ancient Israelites imagined and looked at the world as a map. Now, I don't know if they had literal maps, but for you and me, when we think about a map, what is up on a map? North. And so what is left? What is left on a map?
Wirecast.
West and right is right. Well, for these folks in this part of the world, I don't know if they made maps, but if they would have made a map, up is east, toward the sunrise. Okay? So the sunrise is where you face, and the sun sets behind you. Therefore, if that's the case, if up is east, then left is north, and right is south. Therefore, what Abram is saying is, he's looking up here, and he and Lot are standing between those two dots of Bethel and Ai right there. And what Abram is saying is, he's saying, Lot, if you want to take the left up here, this left part of the hill country, then I'll go to the right. And if, on the other hand, you want to take the right part of the hill country, this down here, then I'll go to the left. So we'll divide the land between us. One of us goes north, the other one goes south. We're both in the land of Canaan. There's enough room for both of us. We're both here in this land that God has promised to give me. Now, what does Lot do? Look at verse 10. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt toward Zoar. This is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east.
This is a demonstration.
The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So you see what's going on. Abram is saying to Lot, if you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. But Lot looks up and he sees this. He sees this plain right here. He doesn't go left or right. He goes forward.
This is a
He
demonstration
goes straight.
of Wirecast.
He sees the Jordan River Valley stretched out here. It's the lowest point in the world. It's below sea level down there. You see Jericho right there? Jericho is the oldest city found in the world. It hasn't been continuously occupied, but its oldest time of being occupied was 8,000 BC, 10,000 years ago. Oldest human habitation in the world. There's a spring there, at least there used to be, that was there. And the reason that there was a city there is because at one time that was great agricultural land. See, now it's very, very dry. And actually, just around Abram's time, it was getting drier. It was getting drier in a really a major problem, a significant way. But it had not completely kicked in yet of how dry it was getting. Now it's very dry, but even today, there's irrigation in this part of the world. Even today, you can go to Israel, and you can find places where there's agriculture right here in this valley because they bring the water in from the Jordan River. But see, at that time, back when Abram was there, this thing right here, this big body of water, the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea, it didn't exist. It wasn't even there. What that is, that's the lowest point of the world, this depression. And so the water from the Jordan River, it flows down from the north, and it just sits there like a bowl, like there's no place for it to go. And so the water goes there, and then the water evaporates, and it just leaves the salt. And then more water comes down, and it evaporates, and it leaves the salt. So it's this extremely salty water. But back then, when it was a lot wetter, it was a lot wetter, there were cities built along here. And there was irrigation. They were irrigating, and so there were these beautiful, fields and vineyards and orchards. I mean, it's described here as like the garden of the Lord. It was like the Garden of Eden. That's how nice it was. And you see that, if you see this territory down here, this green thing, that's that place called Zoar. And it's believed that Sodom and Gomorrah were probably around here. Now, they may have been someplace along the plain, but they were probably around there. They might even have been underwater, what's today underwater. There were 5 cities, and we'll learn about them next week in chapter 14, but 5 cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah and Zoar, that were wealthy cities and cities of the plain. And Lot decides, that's where I'm going. And he separates from Abram. And he really separates. This isn't just like I'm going someplace else so that our flocks and herds don't run together. This is I'm really leaving you.
Of Wirecast.
This is your land, and I'm striking out on my own. I'm going to a different place. And it's really a different place. Because if Lot is really going to live there long term, then eventually he's going to cease to be a herder because he's not going to have room for his flocks and herds down there. He's going to have to be a farmer or, as soon happens, becomes a city dweller. He's changing his lifestyle completely. He has no thought or no ambition for inheriting Canaan as the Lord promised to Abram, which Abram was probably hoping and expecting Lot was going to do with him.
Of Wirecast.
He moves across the river, other side of the river. I'm moving on, and he's moving on next to some people who are exceedingly wicked and exceedingly bad. And we're going to see the consequences of that for Lot here in the future. So Abram loses Lot. Abram loses Lot. Abram loses his hope. He loses what he thinks he's going to have. Abram's now stuck with this promise from God, and how is that going to be fulfilled? I've got no one. I've got nothing. But I have this land. Really, I don't even have the land. I have a promise. Abram takes a loss. It was a loss that probably hurt Abram very deeply. Our evidence for this is that there's 2 more times that we run into Lot, including next week, which we'll see. And both of those times indicate that Abram, even though Lot left Abram, in one sense, Abram never left Lot. Because Abram kept thinking about Lot. He kept thinking about Lot.
Is a demonstration
Lot got into
of
trouble
Wirecast.
twice more, as we'll see this summer, where his life itself was threatened. And both times, the intervention of Abram saved Lot's life. Lot left Abram, but in his mind and heart, Abram never left Lot. We can only imagine what the sense of that loss might be. But from Abram's story here with Lot, I want to suggest to you 3 things to do in your own situation with loss. whether that's the loss of somebody that you've really lost and you think, I don't know how I can keep going, or whether it's the anxiety of the anticipated loss, of the person who's still with you, maybe still living in your house, and yet they're not doing what you want them to do. They're not becoming what you want them to become. They might actually be drifting away. You're afraid of what's going to happen to them. They've got to get their act together or else. How do you handle that? How do you deal with that? I'm going to give you 3 things that I think we can learn from Abram. And the first is take the loss.
This is a demonstration
take the loss.
Of Wirecast.
Abram doesn't stop Lot from going. He realizes that Lot has the freedom to go. He doesn't chase after Lot. He doesn't say, Lot, come back. He doesn't plead with him. He accepts that this is the reality. He accepts the pain. He accepts the separation. That's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do, but it's an important one. The second thing, I'll talk about at greater length.
Of Wirecast.
Abram not only took the loss, but he trusted God's promises. He trusted God's promises. And this is so very important. And that's what we see here in the next verses. After Lot leaves, verse 14, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. After Lot leaves, after Abram takes the loss, God appears to Abram again. He appears to Abram again, and he reminds him of his promises. He said, Abram, look around. Look around. Look all directions. North, south, east, west. Look as far as you can. All of this land I'm giving to you. It belongs to you. Walk around it. Check out what belongs to you. I mean, this is the Canaanite and the Perizzite. You know, they're there and they're there and they're farming and they're doing their thing, and Abram's got to be wondering, where are these people going to go if it's all going to belong to me? What is going on? God says, walk around. There's going to be so many people coming from you. You lost Lot. You think you lost your chance at having a nation? Let me tell you something, Abram. There's going to be so many people coming from you that if you could count the grains of dirt on the earth, then you could count the number of people who are going to belong to you. That's an amazing thing. I mean, what an amazing promise. Look around, Abram. Trust me. Believe me. Lot has to leave you in order for you to get the blessing from me. Abram might have thought at that point, I don't want the blessing without Lot. I love Lot. It doesn't help me to know that I'm going to be blessed if he's going to be left out of this, but God didn't intend to leave Lot out of this. See, many nations, or a great nation, a great multitude, was going to come from Abram, but some nations were going to come from Lot as well. We read about them in a later chapter. 2 nations in particular, the nations of Moab and of Ammon. Moab would be located right here and spreading to the east. Ammon across the river over here and spreading to the east. These 2 nations, Moab and Ammon, would actually prove to be the 2 neighbors of Israel, Abram's descendants, that the Israelites hated the most. Moab and Ammon had an enormous rivalry with Israel. They really did not get along. But there's a really interesting thing you find in certain prophecies in the Old Testament. If you read Jeremiah chapter 48, it is this extremely long prophecy against Moab. I mean, it's like 48 verses. It's chapter 48, and I think it's 49 verses long. It's 48 verses of all of the devastation and destruction that God is going to send on Israel's enemy Moab for its sin. And then the very last verse of the chapter, God says, but after these things, I'm going to restore the fortunes of Moab, declares the Lord. And it's like, what? I mean, it's really odd. And then the very next chapter, Jeremiah 49, there's a much shorter prophecy, but it's
This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast. This is a demonstration of Wirecast.
Raised him from the dead on the third day and restored to him life.
This is a
And not just any
demonstration
life, but
of
a completely new
Wirecast.
life, a brilliant, beautiful, wonderful, glorious life that he's going to restore to all of those who have the faith of Abram, to all of those who believe the promises. In a land as this strip of real estate here in Palestine, but a new and recreated world. That's the promise that's available. No matter what loss you take, you've got to trust God's promises. Trust that whatever loss you take will be restored, will be redeemed.
This is
Yeah,
a
you're gonna have to
demonstration
wait for it,
of
most likely.
Wirecast.
You might have to wait until Jesus comes back. But there is no loss that you take or will take that will not be restored in him in the age to come. And the reason that that's so important is that so often what our losses are idols. They are things that we worship. They are people that we say, I need that, when what we really need to say is, I need Christ. I need Christ. And we compound our suffering by our idolatry. But if we just take the loss and trust in the promises of God, then everything will be restored.
This
Take
is
the
a
loss,
demonstration of
trust
Wirecast.
God's promises, and finally, build your altar. Verse 18 of chapter 13. So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. We can see where he moved. He went to the right. He moved down south. He went to this place down here. Right there. He camped there. And he built an altar to the
This is
Lord.
a demonstration of Wirecast.
Take the loss. Trust God's promises. And build your altar. Build your place of praise, even in the loss. Build your place of praise to say, I know, God, that your promises are true and that everything I've lost will be restored. I know, God, that you're faithful even though I'm suffering and I'm hurting right now. Even though I can't get what I want, even though the person that I think I need is not cooperative. I know, God, that my promise is coming.
This is a
I'm building my
demonstration
altar
of
now to trust you.
Wirecast.
A follower of Jesus, a person in a real relationship with him, expresses God's word naturally. And part of the way that we express God's word naturally is by applying the truth to life. So what I want you to do right now is to apply this truth to your life. And there's several ways that you might do that. I'd like you to take the card out of your bulletin, or it might be in front of you there in the seat if you didn't get a bulletin, and tear that in half. And the side that has our name on it, First Baptist Church of Hollidaysburg.
Of Wirecast.
On the flip side of that, the first, it says how I need to trust and obey as Jesus lives through me. The first option is to turn to Jesus as my Savior and Master for the first time. The first time. Today might be the first day that you say, I am willing to lose everything for the sake of Jesus. I'm willing to lose my whole life if I can find it in Him and Him alone. He's going to be my Master and my Lord from this day forward. Check that box. You might need to repent and devote yourself to follow Jesus again. You might be a Christ follower who's been engaged in sin, who's been wandering away, who's been prioritizing the wrong thing. You need to rededicate your life to Christ today. Third option is to take the lost, trust God, and build your altar. And you might want to fill in the name of the person that you've lost or that you feel like you're losing. And you need to choose to apply this in the peculiar way that's right for your own life, or maybe something else entirely that God has given you. Whatever it is, write that down or check that box and keep it with you. Put it in your pocket. Keep it with you for this week as a reminder of the decision you've made to the Lord. And the other side, please write your name and let us know that you're here. It really helps me to pastor you. Really helps Ann Logue, our administrative assistant, to administer. And also any contact information that you might have that's new to us, please share that with us. And on the back side, you can communicate with me. You can also communicate with me face-to-face or by calling me or by emailing me, but you can communicate with me this way, and I would love to know what decision you've made in your life today and how I might be able to serve and help you. Take this and just leave it in the seat. It'll be collected discreetly afterwards or put it in my hand afterwards.
Of Wirecast.